Welcome to the Peace and Parenting Podcast. I'm Michelle, and I have a lovely guest, Monica Cinegaretz, and she is a teen anxiety coach. So we're going to talk all about teens. And would you just introduce yourself to our lovely listenership?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Michelle, for having me here. I'm really excited to dive into our conversation and talk about all about teens, anxiety, and parenting. My background is in both education and coaching. I'm a certified life and wellness coach. I went to school and I tried to, fit in the mold, and I realized where I was going wasn't really fitting. And so I found a way to integrate my personal experiences with anxiety and my educational experiences together because I was once a teen who was anxious. I was once someone who was overwhelmed and confused, and I did not know where to go. And so my intention for becoming a coach was to help teens shortcut that struggle, but to also raise parents' awareness around anxiety on a non-clinical level so they don't often overlook those signs.
I love it. I think this is great. And I think a lot of people could use your services because sometimes we don't want to go to therapy as a teen. Sometimes that's too daunting. Sometimes it's too formal. Sometimes it's too clinical, like you said. And so I think this is a lovely avenue for teens to feel comfortable. So this is great. I'm glad this service is out there. So let's start by I will have three questions I want to ask you. We talked about them just before we hopped on, but the first one is, what are the biggest mistakes you see or misconceptions or, thoughts around teens that aren't necessarily true these days?
Yeah. So if we were to hone in and focus on anxiety, one of the things that a lot of people mistake it for is that anxiety is just a phase. And the one thing I want to say is yes, it's a natural way of our brain responding to stress. It is there to protect us. It goes into our fight or flight mode. But the problem is that sometimes it's situational, which is where those like natural little to no concerns are. But the problem becomes when a situation goes away, is there a consistent pattern? Is my teen still exhibiting certain signs that go beyond an upcoming like anticipatory anxiety situation? Then it might be something that we need to look into. And the importance of looking into it at that point is that if we don't address it, it's only going to kind of domino.
Mhm.
And what we're doing is when we're addressing it, we're preventing them from adopting maladaptive behaviors, and we're rather helping them adopt healthy behaviors that are going to
Right.
help mitigate those stressors.
Yeah. And I see oftentimes, I mean, I have 2 teens. I have a 19-year-old and 16-year-old, and we're in a world, and I was a high school teacher, so I've spent a lot of time around teens, and I was a high school counselor. And so, it's my happy place is to be around teens. I love teens. It's my most favorite parenting period has been this teen. But I think if we're talking about stress and anxiety, that so many teens also present with behaviors where parents might believe their child is disrespectful or unkind or rude or mean, and in fact often what I see is that the kid is stressed and they don't know how to cope, and one of their maladaptive coping strategies is to take it out on the people that they love the most. What do you see this, or how do you interpret that? Or
Absolutely. That's projection at its finest, right? It's getting triggered and then having those big, overwhelming emotions and not knowing how to self regulate. And oftentimes for teens, why this is even more overwhelming is this is the first time that they're really feeling all these big emotions. And sometimes their brains aren't fully developed to help them understand what's really going on. And so if you're seeing your teen project their behaviors outwardly, that's why anxiety can sometimes like be confused with ODD because they're being defiant. But
yeah.
they're being defiant because there's an underlying reason that's triggering them and they don't know how to handle it. And so they're reacting instead of responding.
Yeah, and I love how you say ODD because we have a lot of people who have kids who have a diagnosis of ODD in our programs, and you know, compliance or cooperation is viewed so differently now than it used to be. We used to, and the way I grew up was you did what your parents said or else. And so us being parents, my generation, it's like we expect that. We expect compliance and cooperation just because we said so, and a child isn't allowed to necessarily say no or fight back, and then there out comes the diagnosis because it's not normal, because for us it isn't normal. That's not how you that's not how you act toward toward your parents. You have to comply with their wishes. And so I think you're right. It can be a product of stress, major stress.
For sure. And
Yeah.
especially if another like reason why it's often overlooked is because everyone always associates that if my teen is anxious, they're going to show those physical signs
Right.
and symptoms, even some of them being projection. But a lot of anxiety, especially when you're dealing with teens who have high functioning anxiety, it's an internalizer. So,
Yeah.
on the outside, they may look polished, organized, driven, but what's the underlying motivation for that? Is it a fear of failure, or is it because they genuinely have that ambition and that drive? And
Yeah.
so, when they internalize it, it's just like they aren't even reaching out for support. It's known
Yeah.
that 1 in 5 of teens experience those symptoms, but over half of those don't actually receive the support that they need. And
Yeah.
I know you mentioned being a counselor, you you have the responsibility of a lot of students. There's a big caseload, and sometimes even if they want the help, they don't necessarily get it because there's such a big demand or there's such a big wait list.
Yeah. Yeah. I had 800 kids on my caseload for one person. That was crazy. That's
A
totally
lot.
not manageable. Yeah, it's not manageable. What's the number one thing you think that parents can do to be supportive of a child that has stress or anxiety? What can they do?
Yeah, so one of my most interesting things that I've even recently realized about anxiety is there is a genetic component. It's
Mhm.
in our genes. So it is more likely for a teen to be anxious if their parent is also anxious.
Mhm.
This doesn't always have to be necessarily the case, but let's
Mhm.
base it off of that for this conversation right now.
Right?
If that's the case, and you're known to be a parent who is a worry wart, or you're known to be someone who is anxious, I want you to really reflect on your own behaviors and make sure that you're modeling those healthy coping mechanisms. Because if your teen sees that you're anxious and are utilizing unhealthy coping mechanisms, they're going to think that that's okay. And
Yeah.
they're going to, even if you don't realize it, they're unconsciously picking it up. And they're not going to realize until a couple of years down the road, until like that awareness starts to build in.
Yeah.
So even take the situation we talked briefly before we recorded. If you're stuck in traffic, I mean, you're in LA, it's going to happen. Traffic's
Yeah.
everywhere, right? If
Yep.
you're frustrated, if you have parent A who's like, this is ruining my day and I'm so frustrated and this sucks and this whatever, you're
Yeah.
really showing that your teen that you have minor stressors that kind of create bigger problems.
Yeah.
They're more likely to snowball into that. But if you have a parent who's just more like, okay, acknowledging that, like, hey, I'm frustrated. This
Yeah.
is frustrating, but this is what I'm going to do in this situation to calm it down. I'm going to play my favorite playlist. I'm going to take a couple, deep breaths, or I'm going to enjoy more quality time with you. And
Yeah.
so if you even have a teen who's anxious, take the time to validate their emotions, to say, hey, I've noticed you're really stressed out because you have an upcoming exam. Is there anything on your mind that you want to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. Acknowledging their stress, I think, is so important, or saying like, "I know school is so hard. I understand this is not manageable at times." And it isn't. By the way, school and life and everything for teens is so stressful and hard. We expect so much of them. It's not sustainable. My daughter, who's a freshman in college right now, like, it's what they expect these kids to do at 19 is insane to me. I mean, I can't believe we expect kids to live on their own at 19. We just throw them out there. Good luck. Good luck. Have fun. Do your laundry. I hope you make it home by Christmas. Like, it's not easy being out there. And I think we forget, we're like, oh, they have the life of Riley. They have everything taken care of for them, everything paid for. Like, they don't have to do anything. But it's all developmentally appropriate. This is stressful for them, and I think, yeah, recognizing that is so important. when you were talking about the traffic. My daughter, she's a competitive dancer and dances 45 minutes away, and we drive there 4 days a week, and it's during rush hour in LA. And
Damn.
so there's a lot of traffic, and I have turned it into like this, joke, like, "Oh, we're getting on the road with the cuckoos today." Like, "How many are we gonna see?" And Pia just starts laughing now because I found myself losing my shit when I was getting into this traffic and it was making the whole car tense, and I had to really reframe it. But what I'd say about that is it's not easy as a parent because we are so stressed. We have so much on our plate. We have to reparent ourselves. We came from dysfunction. We are tasked with raising kids in a world that doesn't support us. And so it's hard to maintain self-regulation. It's necessary, but I just want to acknowledge how hard it is.
For sure. And even if you're noticing it be overwhelming, because like you said, everyone's human, you're going to have moments where you're trying your best, but you still kind of like end up, let's say, freaking out. Take the time to even acknowledge that. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm feeling really stressed out right now. Like, this is what's stressing me out. I need to take 5.
Yep,
You're still
totally.
showing your teen that like you're stressed out, you're overwhelmed, but you're going to do whatever you need in order to just bring those levels down a little bit.
Yeah, or apologize. Be like, "I'm sorry I yelled at the guy next to me. I shouldn't have. That was stupid," and apologize. But yeah, I think life is hard on everyone. It really is. And it's human nature to screw up. So we're all not going to be able to do it right. Our kids, and we have to have grace for them and they have to have grace for us. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, one more question. What are the biggest struggles you see amongst teens these days, nowadays? What are the biggest things that they come to you with?
That's a great question. I say it depends on like because teens have a little bit of an age range, so it
Yep.
depends on where they're at. So I like to say if they're in the tail end of high school and they're starting to think about like post secondary school, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? There's this
Mhm.
immense pressure that society's making me think that I need to know at this age what I want to do. I was in my master's and I still didn't even know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I would say academics for sure is like one of the ranges. If you have pressure along the college and university admission, you could even have pressure when it comes to like test anxiety, when
Mhm.
it comes to the exams. So that's one component that I find to be consistent across the board. And again, it's teens feel overwhelmed and they don't know how to prepare for it. So even when you walk them through making a schedule, making a timetable, learning certain study strategies, that they find very helpful. And the second one that I find to be really common, and this is more so in teen girls than it is in teen boys, but it's navigating that first heartbreak.
Yeah.
So you look at, and if you want to kind of put it more in a broad range, let's put it in the range of relationships. You have
Mhm.
romantic relationships. I'm in my first relationship. I, we just broke up. I don't even know what to do. I have all these yucky emotions. That's one. Then you have friendships. You have the peer pressures. You have the pressures when you go to college, university, and you're away for school, making new friends,
Yeah.
fitting in, having a completely different routine than the one that you've had your whole entire life.
Mhm. So much. There's so much transition, and we always talk about adolescence starts at age 8 for most kids, and so it's like even 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds are starting to feel these big pressures of, "You gotta get good grades to go to middle school, and you gotta get good grades to get into high school," and it's so unfortunate that that's our world, that we've really made academics such a huge thing in our kids' lives. It's very, very, very disturbing in my mind.
And it
How
makes other kids feel like if they don't go down that path, that they're doing something wrong or they can't be successful.
Yeah.
And it's financially it's expensive. It's not
Yeah.
easy. And then they're like, whoa, you can have a parent support, but maybe they're in a family where they have to actually start contributing to their own school.
Yeah.
Then you have
Yeah.
that overwhelming factor too.
Yeah, at 18 years old. It's really unfortunate. Yeah, I think academics definitely I see that school becomes a huge pressure for my kids that they feel as if they have to they have to keep up with the Joneses, right? They've got to go to the right school. Everyone's going to college. Everyone's doing this. They're getting, accepted in this school and that school. And it becomes very, very hard. Also, I see it with sports, high level sports kids and high level activities kids who pressure themselves to really do well and over compete and press themselves. And sometimes there's parent pressure, but that too seems like to be a big one. Do you see that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so there are the pressures of the external. The last thing that like a teen needs, since there's so many transitions and changes going on, even in their bodies, not just like
Yeah.
externally, is their parents to like add on to that pressure.
Yes. Yes.
That's just like a domino effect. And then if they're not taking the time to validate those emotions and those experiences that they're going through, then your teen's actually going to internalize all of that. And they're
Mhm.
going to create a disconnect between you and them. And they're not even going to want to express what they're going through because they're being dismissed as, oh, like, like, for example, if you take a whole like breakup situation and you want to be like, there's so many fish in the sea. Don't worry about it. You're still young. You have so much life ahead of you, right? You're not taking the time to say, this sucks. And I
Yes.
know how you feel.
I
And the
know.
biggest thing I find with parents too is, you really want to help out. And I get it. You want to be there and guide your teen however much you can. But some two tips I want to give them when they're expressing whatever challenge that they're going through, go in with the assumption that you actually have no idea what they're going through.
Right.
Because even if you've had a similar experience, it may have landed completely different.
Yeah.
And a good strategy is just be curious. Tell me more about that. And
Yes.
when they're expressing it to you, sorry, restate it to make sure, I'm hearing that you're saying XYZ. Is this correct?
Yeah. So
So
good.
that's the first tip. And then the second tip is when they're, again, sharing with you something, ask them what they need. Do you need me to listen or do you need me to help you find a solution?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think when we're helping a child find the solution, there's a way to help without being the solution. There's a way to say, "Well, what do you think you should do? Well, if you
Yes,
did that, what would happen? And if you didn't do that, what else could happen? And what do you think the right answer is?" Because I really think that we have a tendency as parents, and it all comes from a beautiful place, right? We just wanna help our kids, get through whatever it is that they're having a hard time with, and we're like, "But I know the answer. I can just tell them to do this, and they can do that, and then they're gonna feel better." But they really need to come up with it at this age themselves, and I think there's a beautiful place to just be supportive without trying to fix everything for them, because it comes better from their inside of them.
yes. And you're turning it back on them. So you're actually helping them elicit the solution
Yes, that's
instead of
right.
constantly reassuring them and then them depending on you in moments of
Yes,
stress to
yeah,
reassure them. They need to build that skill set on their own. And if they constantly have you, they're not only going to seek reassurance from yourself, they're going to seek reassurance from other people in their other relationships.
yeah, and then also you're not giving them the message like, "I know you can figure this out. I don't need to be your solution. You actually don't need me. You already have all the answers inside of yourself." And when we can empower them and that they believe that we believe that they'll find the answer, then I think they get that self-assuredness and the self-reliance and the self-esteem and all of that stuff, and when they're relying on us, it kind of whittles away at that.
You got it.
Yeah, it's so good.
Absolutely.
Monica, thank you.
No
Thank you
problem.
for coming on. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
People can find me primarily my podcast. It's called Parenting Anxious Teens. I really kind of hit home on what non-clinical anxiety is, what it looks like so parents don't overlook those symptoms, and also different strategies that they can apply within the home. That is my primary, like I like to say, my prized possession. So if you want to learn more about who I am and what I do, that's where you should find me.
Great, and you're on all the platforms?
All the platforms, yeah,
Great.
Spotify, Apple, you name it. But if you want to take the next step, I also have my website, www.consciouscoach.biz, where you can learn more about like my program, my services, and how I really help your teen.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your insights, and thank you everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time on the Peace and Parenting Podcast.